Department of Energy, the Energy Information Administration, issues their annual energy outlook. That just happened to come out last week. So there's some information in there I thought would be interesting to review. When they do their annual energy outlooks, they create what they call their reference case. So that typically entails things sort of staying as is, no new regulations or laws passed that would change things, and any laws or regulations that have just been issued that have to be implemented, they do include those. But that's their reference case, and then I'll show you that. And then they do some little bit of kind of what I call what-if scenario cases. What if the oil and gas resources come out lower than maybe anticipated, or they come out higher than anticipated? What if energy efficiency, demand response to conserve and reduce electricity demand makes greater strides? What might be the possible generation mix and emission footprints associated with that? And also along with that, I looked at the North American Electricity Reliability Council. Every year around December, they issue their reliability assessment of the grid. And they talk about issues and what's planned within the companies, within all the various regions that NERC has, both planned and also anticipated, even though they may not be officially planned. And they try to give a forecast on how these things plan out. So with that, I'll show you the results, key highlights, and also give you kind of one of the quick takeaways from the NERC assessment of December was they find that the electric grid reserve margin will be at risk, already is at risk in some places, and will actually get worse within their 10-year assessment period. Both are talking about this new abundant supply of natural gas causing a lower price and therefore being more price competitive for coal. And that's the reason for fewer electrons from coal in recent years, and their assessments of how that may play out in the future. And also the DOE's really did some analyses on shifting away from what they call the more carbon-intensive fuels so that they can get to a stabilizing energy related to CO2. So, and then I'll just do some wrap-up. DOE provided 6 key findings. I won't go through these particular first 3, but I want to talk about these. I know Lloyd will put all these slides up on his website, so there's kind of like information-intensive slides on some of these that you can review later. But I just want to at least have them all available, and then I'll just highlight what things I want to focus on. So here, the last 5 and 6, the evolving natural gas markets will spur increased use of natural gas for electricity, and perhaps even transportation. And they do review some LNG export opportunities as well. And also a shift away from the carbon-intensive fuels such as coal for electricity to help stabilize U.S. CO2 emissions. And within that also is a large emphasis on energy efficiency and conservation to reduce electricity consumption. This is their overall assessment of the energy mix of how we would produce and consume energy. So you can see coal is still staying relatively stable. This is 18% of the total, so there is a reduction in absolute quantity of coal consumption by 2040. So the period for this analysis by the DOE goes through 2040. You can see the natural gas ticking up to 30%, so quite a large increase in natural gas. Some liquid biofuels increasing as well. And the renewables, excluding biofuels, ticks up quite a bit. Liquid fuels, biofuels only goes up about 1%. And I'll jump into the NERC, so I'll have the outline, I'll highlight which ones I'm going to jump into. So this is what NERC is showing currently, that by 2018, that the areas, regions in the NERC territory, Canada, and the US are anticipated to be below the electric grid reserve power generation margins. And by 2023, we have even more areas in the US that are anticipated to be below the reserve margins. Some of this is because of anticipated retirements of coal power plants to meet the mercury air toxic standards EPA has issued that need to be have solutions implemented by 2016. They also have about 6 findings, and I just show a couple of ones relative to coal, where they're anticipating capacity retirements projected to surpass 85 gigawatts by 2023. NERC does their assessment on 10-year periods, little shorter horizon compared to the DOE-EIA. So big implications if this does play out. And this shows where they're anticipating some of the biggest retirements. Following the chart on the left is the DOE charts, and these are the NERC regions. And you can see 4 of those state regions where majority of Wyoming coal gets exported. So some of the 4 top 10 states in the U.S. So those regions of CERC and RFC are projected to have the greatest declines in coal power plant generation as a result of the DOE assessments. This is their base case assessment in the dark blue line. Let's see if we get your time here. So this dark blue line is the reference case. The brown is 2012 reference. The green is a low electricity demand case. So you can see when they show if the U.S. aggressively pursues energy efficiency, conservation, and also what they include as end-use electricity, self-generation, distributed generation, rooftop solar is probably the key part. They're showing about a 15% possibility in some of their low electricity demand cases. That's low electricity demand from the grid. And this kind of shows you what some of those scenarios might look like. When they do those scenario analyses, they're doing those as a way to facilitate policy discussions and policy decision-making processes. So it's important to recognize what these kind of thinking and analyses might portend. So if we want to have a seat at the table and have a part of the conversation to influence, we need to see where these things may drive. Also, NERC, something I was talking to a few people earlier today, as a result of NERC's reliability assessment, they are indicating that if we take a lot of these coal power plants off the grid, there's an inertia that creates stability on the grid to maintain voltage and frequency. We will see significant disruption in the ability to maintain stability on the electric grid. And reliability will also be at risk as well. That very large, massive steam turbine connected to an electric generator has a lot of rotating mass that can ride through various changes and fluctuations on the grid, where an inverter-based PV solar panel has essentially zero inertia. So substantial penetrations on renewables and producing 85 gigawatts or more of steam turbine powered by coal is projected to have significant impacts on grid stability, and they're forecasting that additional stability components and technologies will then need to be added to the grid to offset that problem. Go to the abundance supply of natural gas. So NERC is looking at 28 gigawatts of gas-fired capacity planned over the next 10 years, and in their conceptual case, it's not officially planned, perhaps another 108 gigawatts of natural gas. So this is where they're seeing how coal will be supplanted. This is one of the energy generation technologies, with the forecast for the natural gas prices staying low enough for that to be a price competitive solution, and probably also looking at if you take coal price and then add on the cost of carbon capture or carbon utilization and other emission cleanup technologies, the cost per electricity for coal will increase, therefore allowing a higher price of natural gas to still be competitive. And this is their analysis on what they call cumulative plan in the top, so kind of a busy chart, as well, these will all be online. So showing the cumulative, the blue is natural gas increase that they project by 2023, and a decline in coal cumulative by 2023. So you're look at these numbers here. Coal they're projecting is a 35 gigawatt decline, with on their conceptual case, maybe 67 gigawatt decline. And they're showing on their plan case, there's about 28 gigawatts of new gas and 137 gigawatts of new gas conceptually. So, because their assumptions include economic conditions and other factors, so there's a plus minus variability on their assessments. Also showing large amounts of renewables, non-hydro, almost 18 gigawatts, and in their plan conceptual, it's 177 gigawatts of non-hydro renewable. So that's where the instability of the grid starts to come into play, and that level of renewables with low inertia comes into the grid. And shifting away from carbon, this is from the DOE-EIA assessment on their sort of most aggressive scenario that they analyzed, they're forecasting upwards of almost 110 gigawatts of coal power plant generation coming offline. So that's a little more than a third of the current generation capacity in the United States. So a big impact. Their base case shows 50 gigawatts. That's this line right here. That's their reference case by 2020. Then they look at high oil and gas resources. So if we have high resources, we extract more by all the new technologies, and that will keep the price of natural gas low. And that'll make natural gas more competitive and therefore more compelling to shut down more coal plants. And then there's some other scenarios with those high aggressive targets for energy efficiency, conservation, demand response, and self-generation, like rooftop solars, that would accelerate coal retirements to get to 110 gigawatts over retirement. And as you can see, even that case shows you get the majority of that 110 much sooner, 2025, 2028, that time frame, based on their analysis and if those policy considerations actually play out. And this is just to show comparison where NERC is looking at with their 2023 plan and conceptual, achieves a net of about 67, minus 67 gigawatts retired. So that's close to this reference case, or not reference case, but the high oil and gas resource case. And part of what we looked at, Lloyd and I have been kind of traveling around since I've joined the board and talking to people, looking at what's coming out ahead. So it's try to look at not just what's done yesterday and predict the future, but what are the trends and drivers behind those changes in policies, so we get a sense as to where things may go and how we can adjust, adapt, or maybe influence, or as the governor talked about, understand and guide the technology solutions to address what these drivers are, so we can have a more favorable future for coal and generation in general. What this shows is this is the capacity factor for coal power plants. This is off the U.S. Department of Energy, Energy Information Administration. You can download all their Excel files and you can do your own calculations and graphs and plots. So that's what this was. Lloyd talked about, I was working nights and weekends, and some of that's true. This is a volunteer job the governor appointed me to. It's a fun job. We can see here, the reason they show such a substantial decrease in coal capacity factor is the total generation capacity in the system at that point in time was what it was, but then with the low price of natural gas, there was a lot of unused natural gas combined cycle generation that was built in the early 2000s, and that kind of been sitting idle as gas prices were higher a little bit after that. So what they're saying here is because the price of natural gas was so low, a lot of those natural gas combined cycle plants went online and they produced the electricity. So coal power plants weren't used as much. They were used to a lower percentage of their total capacity, and that's what got it down around 57%. And then if you look in the future, these two cases, this is the annual outlook for 2013, the annual outlook for 2014. So I plotted the numbers because we were interested in these capacity factors and how that influenced what was available and how you supported the amount of generation that could reasonably be retired, or what would be needed to actually meet the future demands. So in this case here, 2014, their reference case, it was showing a little bit around about 75% capacity factor. Now they do a couple analyses, and they're saying that increases because as more plants are shut down, in these years here, especially 2016, the plants that are in existence and are cleaner will actually operate at a higher percent. Now with their low oil and gas resource case, so the price of gas will be a lot higher, they're projecting the coal plants that do exist will run at a much higher capacity factor, around 0.81. And if we have high oil and gas, or maybe I got the other way around, the price of gas is lower, and coal power plants will not be used as much because natural gas will be more competitive than burning coal for electricity. So those are just trying to show you where some of the projections are, and then quickly give you a wrap up. This shows in the bar chart their projections for natural gas, accelerate coal and nuclear retirements. There's a big jump in natural gas, very little coal, some new nuclear, and here they're just accelerate coal and accelerate nuclear retirements. And there's their reference case. There's still quite a bit of natural gas even in their reference case, And if you look at electricity generation by billion kilowatt hours, you can see the natural gas increases from the reference case. And renewables picks up, especially in these areas here. And as a result, Lloyd was saying, well, what does that mean for implications to the natural gas sector? So with the data we got from the DOE, we looked at, this is what the projections were, and, consumption of natural gas in the latter part of this period. So if you have a 2020 advanced coal and nuclear retirements, 2040 advanced coal and nuclear retirements, see a dramatic increase, almost a 68% increase in natural gas. In order to enable that, we're going to need quite an expansion and build up of the natural gas infrastructure to transport that kind of natural gas around to where it would actually be used to produce electricity. So if you don't know if you saw, maybe around 2010, I think it was the Natural Gas Association, the Natural Gas Association, projected that people talking about, hey, we're just going to fuel switch, that the infrastructure investment needed to accomplish the fuel switching people were talking about is on the order of $2 trillion in the natural gas sector in order to enable that. So it's not just the cost of the plants, but what's the infrastructure that's going to enable such a change. It's pretty substantial. They do show a little bit of net exports on natural gas, upticking here that kind of adds to it. This is the component for electricity generation to combine to get the total natural gas. Most everything else stays relatively flat with a little bit of increase in industrial natural gas consumption. And just kind of wrap up, accelerated coal power generation is projected. The RC and CERC are experiencing the greatest change impacts into some of those scenarios and forecast assessments. Natural gas, renewable generation, forecast for a large percentage increase. Gas consumption projected to increase about 64%. Some of the other charts that are on there, they were looking at natural gas approaching a delivery price of $11 as a part of these analyses. Coal generation retirements projected somewhere between 38 gigawatts to 110 gigawatts, depending on how these scenarios play out. Average U.S. electricity prices are projected to increase 13% or more to $11 per kilowatt hour. Now, that's nationally across the U.S. You can imagine it will be regionally, locally different. Hopefully we won't see that in Wyoming, because that would be a 100% plus increase in Wyoming. And what NERC emphasized, more technology will be required to meet grid stability specs under high renewable scenarios to offset the benefits of steam turbine generators that provide a lot of inertia. And the ability, also in this, is the ability to provide dispatchable reactive power to help stabilize the grid as well, which most of these renewables do not even have that functional capability to do. So with that, I'm done.
Questions from the audience? So
Are you guys still digesting lunch, or was that really that complete and thorough?
So I have a question, Don. You showed us the capacity factor in the reference case, going up to 75, 80%. One thing you didn't talk about, and if you could share, if you have that information, what age are those coal plants that are operating at 80% capacity factor?
That was some of the concerns on the age of the coal power plants, that if you extend it out and delay new builds, then the existing power plants would need to be extended in operation. So earlier in the time frame, when you're looking at plants that might be beyond 40 years of service life, maybe 50, maybe even some of them could even potentially be approaching 60 before they were retired. And so there was a lot of suspect as to, could you really achieve those kind of capacity factor power plants of that age and effectively get that amount of power generation out? Even though the nameplate capacity rating is what it was when it was brand new, you're effectively really not going to get that amount. So we kind of think those capacity factors are suspect and really not practically achievable. We need to do a little more digging, and that's why we started looking at the NERC data, because they're a lot more tied in with managing reliability, and they need to have much more credible forecasts and projections.
So, and back to the reference case, Don, you know, so there are facilities in there that they're showing 75, 80% capacity factor, 50, 60, 70 years old facility. Since that is not too realistic or practical, you know, how can they continue, or do you think they'll continue to refer to that as the reference case, or if they'll get more realistic here in the coming months and, you know, start revising those numbers?
That sounds like a question that Tom Dennis and I were discussing about that. If they're looking at policy what-if analyses, you know, perhaps their practical, grounded, you know, realistic forecasts aren't as robust as we would like them to be. Somebody would have to facilitate that conversation. We, as a board and the infrastructure authority, could try to bring that to light. I think we should talk with NERC first. Can we get our confirmations? And if we get, NERC is in charge of managing and ensuring like grid stability and reliability is there, meaning no reserve margins. So they have the day-to-day operators essentially are overseeing, guiding those operators. So I think we need to work with them first, confirm what our suspicions are, and they will be the ones that will actually implement whatever changes need to be done in operational scenarios to keep things stable. So, so some of these forecasts could be quite a bit off. If those coal power plants can't achieve that amount of electricity, then where's that electricity going to come from? More natural gas, more energy efficiency. So we have some suspects on suspicions about the quality of the analysis.
And one last question. If we see the natural gas demand grow by 20, 30, 40% or more, what does that say about our need to even think about exporting natural gas in the form of LNG?
Good question. The DOE-EIA, part of their assessment on that, the high case with the 110 gigawatts of coal shut down, they project as the price of natural gas domestically increases and becomes more in line with foreign prices, that the amount of LNG export will decline, and that will make natural gas available for that power generation from natural gas assets.
Jim Newcomb, I'm a wind developer. I'm wondering if there's any implication about assumption of storage in renewables in your projections. I think it's California that has some requirements now that they have to develop some storage as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know it's a year and a half ago, maybe almost 2 years, the Public Utility Commission mandated electricity energy storage within California system. I guess quite large amounts coming. Is that number 600 megawatts or more, something along those lines, to handle and smooth out the intermittent nature of the increasing amount of solar and wind. I'm talking with some of the utilities there when I was at the Department of Energy. The big concern was they might have a renewable portfolio standard of say 20%. Well, that's averaged out over the entire 12 months within a year. So that means during some parts of the year, you will actually exceed that 20% of renewable power to the grid. Once you get into that mode of about 15 or 20% higher, all the forecasts from Evergreen and others are, now you're going to get into grid stability problems. And so you're going to need energy storage even before you probably get to a total of 20% average grid stability, because there are going to be parts of the year where you might get 40, 50% renewables into the system, and then you're at 1 or 2%. So even that average portfolio standard creates stability problems locally within their distribution system. Relative to energy storage, probably fast dispatch or natural gas is going to be necessary. Some of the studies that Lloyd's done with Enron show that Wyoming's wind, if these transmissions are allowed to go forward, actually fills the valleys where California wind and renewables drop off. So there's a way to help offset that and reduce the spread that energy storage needs to cover if we can get Wyoming wind exported into California.